Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our 8th installment of LBDA's 2024 webinar series, Empowerment Through Education. I'm Brandi Hackett, the Senior Manager of Support Services here at the Lewy Body Dementia Association, and it is my sincere pleasure to be with you all today as host of this discussion. Today, we'll be discussing the very personal experience of ambiguous loss in Lewy body dementia. And we will be joined by Lance Wilson, who is a social worker, and a panel of people who are affected by Lewy as they discuss how they cope with ambiguous loss. Before we get started, a few words about the Lewy Body Dementia Association. We are a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to optimize the quality of life for those affected by Lewy by accelerating awareness, advancing research, both for early diagnosis and improved care, as well as providing comprehensive education, like where you are now today, as well as compassionate support. And I am sincerely honored to be a part of our support team here at the LBDA, and we're proud to offer a variety of resources and connections. And towards the end of the webinar, we will be able to share with you guys a resource on how to connect back with us and support. A few housekeeping items. You can select Show Captions at the bottom of your screen and in the Zoom toolbar, and it will allow the captions to be shown on your screen only. There's also a resources button that we ask that you engage with that has downloadable resources for you for further education around this topic. You are also welcome to submit your questions throughout this presentation using the Q&A icon, which is also there on the Zoom taskbar below. And following Lance's presentation and the panel discussion, we will have about 15 minutes or so to field audience questions. This presentation is being recorded, and an email will be sent to those who registered with the link and will be able to review the recording in about 1 week. And to be able to watch any of our former webinars you may have missed, you can visit our YouTube channel, LBDA TV, and Rose will now drop that link in the chat. Lastly, when you leave the webinar today, a brief survey will appear asking you to provide feedback about today's presentation. And we ask that you please take a moment to provide additional feedback, and this does help us with future content. Now let's learn a bit more about who's going to be joining us today in the audience. So Rose is going to have a poll that's going to surface on your side of the screen, and we're going to give you a minute or so to answer the poll. We see a lot of responses coming in. Thank you guys for responding. We're going to let it go for just a moment more. Okay, perfect. So it looks like we have a great mix of individuals with different relationships to Lewy. So we have quite a few that are attending that are themselves diagnosed, a little bit more that are in a role of care partner. We have some healthcare providers as well as some additional supports to those with Lewy. So we thank you all for taking your time to be here. Now I want to take a moment to introduce our speaker today. And Mr. Lance M. Wilson is the social worker, outreach, and education coordinator at Jefferson's Health Comprehensive Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders Center, that's a mouthful, Lance, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Lance is a certified social worker, both in healthcare and advanced social worker in gerontology, both of which are specialty certifications from the National Association of Social Workers. He has professionally worked in the medical, mental health, and public health fields for over a decade. In addition to his work with individuals impacted by Parkinson's disease and their care partners, he's also working on his PhD in social work at Widener University, where he hopes to add to the research of best practices within the Parkinson's community. And I turn it over to you, Lance. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Brandi. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Lance Wilson. I'm hoping that we can have a really fruitful and wonderful conversation regarding ambiguous loss and what that looks like specifically for those impacted and navigating Lewy body. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You know, all the years of practice, this should be simple, right? Let's see. Okay, so I'm hoping that my screen is able to be seen. Just double checking to make sure that is the case. Awesome, thank you. Think that okay, so so we're going to talk about coping with ambiguous loss and Lewy body dementia. And so before we get started, just want to give a quick shout out that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which I believe is one of the main reasons that we are having this conversation today. So if you didn't know, now you know. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we are definitely talking about these types of situations and conversations that come up for individuals as they navigate Lewy body. The next thing I also want to do is just do a sensitive topic alert. I recognize that conversations, both for anyone involved, anyone navigating and trying to work their way through Lewy, this can be a very sensitive topic, right? And so I want you to make sure you take care of yourself in whatever way you deem fit or necessary, because there might be emotions that might come up for you or what have you. So I just take this moment to make sure that you take care of yourself in accordance with it being Mental Health Awareness Month. I want to make sure that you are taking care of your mental health as we go through this conversation. Okay, so the things that I hope that you all take away from today's conversation is to know what ambiguous loss is, to be able to define it, and also understand that it can present in various different ways. And I think that we'll get a kind of a taste of that when we move on to the panel discussion, that there is no one single way that Lewy body can appear. Also, we hope to highlight various versions of lived experience for ambiguous loss and what that looks like for Lewy, and also identify some of the coping strategies. So if nothing else, I hope you get some good little tidbits to consider that might help you in your journey, or might be for my healthcare professionals out there, might be something you can take back to the individuals you work with to help them along their journey. So to get things started, I know this slide is kind of everywhere, right? So I'm just going to walk us through it. So ambiguous loss is all of these things, right? So ambiguous loss is typically unclear, it's confusing, it's incomprehensible, it's this gray space, it doesn't really make sense, it's kind of the little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I think the biggest thing that we're talking about when we're talking about loss, right? Because I think most people have a general understanding of loss and what that looks like. But this is a type of loss that lacks verification, hence the ambiguity of it all. Ambiguous loss can be traumatic, and it's typically relational. So it's happening between relationship dynamics and dyads. And it is intentionally external forces that are acting upon. So illness, war, and etc. Other types of issues that happen externally from the person. And then it exists on this, the way that ambiguous loss is teased out is it's teased out into both type 1 and type 2, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And so type 1 of ambiguous loss speaks to physical absence with psychological presence. And so again, we're talking about war, terrorism, natural disasters, maybe divorce, maybe adoption or loss of contact. So the idea behind this type 1 of ambiguous loss, we're talking about we don't have direct physical access to the person, but we're thinking about them. They're in our mind, our thoughts, our prayers, what have you. But the one that we're going to speak a little bit more to today is type 2. And type 2 speaks to psychological absence and physical presence. So I want you to think about things like Lewy, Alzheimer's, other types of dementias, maybe traumatic brain injury, maybe addiction, depression, chronic mental health or physical illnesses that impact specifically someone's memory or their ability to be cognizant with or present cognitively. And again, going back to what makes ambiguous loss such a topic, right, is because the losses don't typically make sense. And as we talk about loss and we talk about grief and loss, and most people automatically go to the jump to the idea of we're talking about grief and loss and we're talking about someone passing away. But that is not as finite, correct? So this is something a little bit more, again, ambiguous, right? And so what do we know about ambiguous loss? Because this is kind of the background of understanding what ambiguous loss is. So Dr. Pauline Bawes coined this in the 1970s. And what is specific about ambiguous loss is that it talks about something being present and absent at the same time. So that's paradoxical, which is why this is a more confusing type of loss to navigate than, again, someone who might have passed one. And so it freezes the grief process. And so what's wrong with that, or what's the problem that comes along with freezing the grief process, is that we don't have the ability to start navigating what we do to make us feel better. We'll get into some of the specific things, but one of those things might be different types of events or different types of things that we might do to make us feel better, different rituals. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. It can hinder your cognition. It blocks your coping and your decision-making skills. So this is happening as someone is blocked from processing grief. This is keeping them in a constant state of trauma, right? And we know that trauma exposure to our brains over time is not healthy. It is going to ultimately do different things and create different neural pathways that can take away from our cognition. The next thing is that closure is considered impossible in ambiguous loss. And so what happens is that when the mind can't figure something out, it starts coming to its own conclusions. That's what people do. That's human nature. So it causes those that are close to the person with Lewy and those care partners supporting the individual with Lewy, they have to construct a truth. Now, whether or not that is an actual truth is a truth to them. So that's what we're working with. And again, going back to the idea of rituals, right? So the typical rituals that would typically be associated with losing someone would not be performed here because the person is physically still there. So what type of grieving process can one have when we're only taught about grief and loss from a standpoint and where somebody has passed away? And that's what that's what leans into ambiguous loss and what that looks like. And the next thing is that it's complex, right? So again, going back to this paradoxical understanding that ambiguous loss does not have, again, one way of looking. It could look completely different. And then the thresholds and the internal things that people bring with them are also going to offer how people navigate this. And one thing I want to call out, especially with ambiguous loss, and especially in Lewy, is that others may have a difficult time showing up. And what I mean by showing up is that they may not know how to support you through this. And this is both for individuals living with Lewy, and this is also for care partners, right? So I think when we talk about loss and we talk about grief, it's typically circumstantial. It's not an ongoing process, right? And so it happens, it's one event, it's one big traumatic event, and that's how people are typically used to navigating grief and loss. And so with this, with Lewy, we're dealing with constant griefs, minor griefs over time, which add to a larger one, if that makes sense. And so one of the things that we also have to keep in mind is that we're not used to holding the paradox open. And what I mean by that is that it's counterintuitive for us as a society to keep grief open, right? So it's like, okay, this person is grieving. I show my support. I show my affection. I show up for them. I make sure that they are emotionally tended to. But we're not used to doing that ongoing throughout years, right? Again, a snapshot versus the long haul. And so we as a society are typically solution focused. And so we get to this point where it's, how do I make this person that I care about feel better? And I think that is going to be a hard question to ask because it's going to change over time. And the needs of the individual with Lewy and the care needs for the care partner as well are going to change over time. Because that's what we do as people. We continue to learn and grow. So here's some of the takeaways. I'm very big on, if you heard nothing else I say, I try to always include conversations that have takeaway points, things that you can pull from and things that you can take back to people. So the first thing I want to point out is both and thinking. And so what is both and thinking? I'm glad you asked. So both and thinking is the understanding the paradox exists, right? So it's this understanding that something can be happening in a dual space. So oftentimes I sometimes have conversations and people will drill down on this idea of, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. And then I incorporate the conversation of both and, right? So yes, you feel like you shouldn't be feeling that way, but this also happened, right? So it's a space where you're holding space for both sides of the fence, so to speak, because sometimes we get into an idea where we become so concrete in our thinking that we don't allow space for us to have feelings. We don't allow space for us to navigate that. And so the next thing is support groups, right? And so support groups is a model that's been around forever, right? So we're thinking about having relationship with other people in the same boat, other people who are navigating this. And this again goes for both people living with Lewy and individuals who are care partners for those with Lewy. Because it's always a different experience when you can have a conversation with someone and they experience the same thing that you have experienced. Or if they can offer suggestions for things that might have helped them figure out or navigate what this looks like. And it helps build resiliency. Sometimes people will talk about resiliency and they talk about it in such a passive way. But resiliency can be built up to it's not as finite as people might say. It's like, oh, that person is so resilient. But we don't know what that person had to overcome to get to a place of resiliency. So sometimes when we have those conversations and navigate those spaces with other individuals who have had similar experiences to ours, that resiliency can be built. Programs like this, psychoeducational talks and seminars similar to this one, having individuals come and offer their expertise or their experiences. These are all things that get us thinking into a place where we have now additional thought processes or maybe been introduced to some thoughts that are outside of our purview that might offer us some education, so to speak, quote unquote, education, to figure out what it is that we want to do moving forward or things that we can reference moving on. Next thing is spiritual support and validation. I think it's so easy for people to say, oh, I validate you, but there's something so powerful about people knowing that their story makes sense and that people hear them and that people are sharing in that moment with them, even if people don't understand what someone as a care partner or living with Lewy is experiencing. If that person says that they're experiencing X, Y, and Z, you validate that, right? This is something that again, everybody does not show up the same way living with Lewy, nor do they show up the same way as a care partner. So validating the space that they're in, and if they say it's difficult or they're trying to figure out which way the sky is up, sometimes we need to have a conversation with the person that we're talking to, right? Sometimes they just need to know that they're doing a good job. Or that they're navigating with the best of their ability. There's always shoulda, coulda, wouldas, right? There's always things that we could have done differently or things we should have thought about differently. And hindsight is always 20/20. But validation is very important for people to know that they're doing the best they can with what they have access to at the moment that the problem appeared. And I think that is something that all of us need. To make sure that we're doing stepping with the best foot possible. And then the other piece about rituals that I had mentioned earlier. So rituals are typically, when we think of a ritual, we might think of maybe a church service or a burial for someone who's passed away, right? And so a lot of times, and the reason I keep using that example is because when people think of grief and loss, that is the ideology that they jump to first. And so with rituals, sometimes we have to repurpose them, right? So again, so identifying the small losses, and this is again, for both care partners and individuals with Lewy, right? So identifying the small losses. So again, this is a chronic ongoing thing, right? This is not a one snapshot type of grief. This is something that's happening over time. And what's going to end up happening is that if you don't identify or signify the things that are the small losses, then what you're doing is you're not giving yourself, again, we talked about how grief is frozen. This allows us to thaw it out a little bit. And so you include your other social supports. So how do you do a ritual for a small loss, right? So we might be talking about a balloon release, right? We might talk about wish paper, which I just found out is called wish paper. And that might be like a piece of paper you write something on, kind of like when you hear maybe a therapist or someone say you should write the letter, but don't send it. So kind of writing out your feelings and then burning it, right? And so burning is supposed to be therapeutic in its own sense, not saying anything for pyromaniacs. But specifically things that make you feel better as you navigate this ongoing disease. And so I really like what the literature has to say. And I came across this phrase of guidelines, not prescriptions, for resiliency, not normalcy. And so I really like the wording of this because it really speaks to this is not a pill, right? I can't just say, hey, here's a pill, it'll make everything better, it'll make everything normal. Because again, going back to this does not manifest the same way for everybody. And again, we're operating with people's individual thresholds. Some people might be really good with navigating grief, or might have a really strong threshold or have a lot of skills because they might have been to therapy before, or they've experienced other types of losses, so they have a threshold for this. Other people, if this is their first time experiencing something like this, or a first time navigating any type of loss, or first time navigating a loss to this nature, something that's so, again, ambiguous, then that might not look the same, right? And so it's not to say that person does not still have resilience, but what it's saying is that that person has resiliency that can be built. And so here is just the 1 through 6 of some other things that we can talk about. And so finding meaning, right? So a lot of people, when a chronic ailment or a chronic illness such as Lewy is introduced, they stop having like holiday dinners, they stop having birthday parties, they stop having things like that. And I'm here to tell you, those things can be adapted, right? Those things should still be celebrated. They are important for people to still know and to process and to be a part of. So sometimes there might be some adaptability that needs to take place. And then, of course, tempering mastery. So holding space for two things, which we talked about earlier, the both and kind of thought process. Restructuring your identity. And this is something that I've been spending a lot of time on in my PhD process right now, is trying to figure out what identity looks like for people as they navigate a chronic illness such as Lewy, right? So restructuring your role, or asking yourself, what is your role? And I think that when people are navigating, they might have been a spouse before, or a sibling before, or a child before, or what have you, whatever their identity was. There are certain protocols that come along with that. And so when you're navigating something such as ambiguous loss, sometimes you have to restructure what that role looks like and some of the things and the behaviors that were associated with it. Normalizing ambivalence, so talking about conflicted emotions, right? So going back to that number 2 piece, holding space for two things. You can feel angry and sad at the same time. Those are general emotions that come along with grief and processing, and that's okay. Revising attachment. Again, going back to this idea of accepting the ambiguity rather than resisting it, because fighting it is going to freeze your grief process even more. And then the last thing is discovering hope. This might look different for different people. For religious individuals, this is typically understanding that there might be a connection to a bigger picture, right? And so this works for some people, it's for other people it doesn't. And again, discovering hope is something that is individual to the person. And so it looks very different depending on who is seeking hope and what kind of hope that they're looking for. Um, and so some specific, and I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up this part of the conversation, but some specific examples that have come forward to me were, as it relates specific to Lewy and ambiguous loss, is the cognitive fluctuations. You don't know when they're coming. You don't know when they're going to be active. You don't know when it might be a moment of clarity and then a moment of maybe paranoia or delusion. So trying to process that and try to figure out what that looks at. And I think the other piece of this is the lack of staging piece, right? So when we think about things like, let's say, for example, Parkinson's, or we think about Alzheimer's, there are stages that can group people into, and I think that it's been expressed by a lot of individuals in the community that that lack of staging as you navigate Lewy can be very frustrating, because it's not as clean cut, so to speak. So here are my references. Thank you for your time today. And I'm going to let the real experts come on and have a conversation with us, because I'm a healthcare provider. I'm not the one navigating this every day. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. If I could, there we go.
Lance, thank you so very much for everything you shared with us today. I know that this was a brief summary of a very deep topic, but I think you did such a beautiful job really summarizing and giving some great feedback. So thank you so much for that. It is my sincere honor to introduce those that are on this screen with me. I've had the pleasure of knowing all of them for a number of years, and really just proud to be sharing this space with them. As Lance mentioned, these are our experts. And so to really pass the baton, know that the full bios, so I'm going to share brief parts of their bios, but know that their full bios are on our registration page if you want to take a little deeper dive. But wanted to take a quick moment to introduce those that are with us on the screen. First, Dan and Jen Vaughn. So grateful you guys are both with us. Dan worked in various technology, marketing, and business development roles before leading the External Technology Collaborations Organization at a Fortune 500 company. He lives in the Finger Lakes region of New York with his wife, Jen, who joins him today, and they have 2 adult children who return home regularly for home-cooked meals and good laughs. I get that. Dan was diagnosed with LBD in April of 2021, and since then, his new mission is to love, laugh, learn, and help others every day. Jen has been Dan's wife for over 30 years, and she's also with us. Helen Metzger, for over 30 years, she's been a primary care partner and healthcare advocate for 2 generations of her family who were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease with Lewy Body Dementia. 3 members of her family have succumbed to the disease: her father, her sister, and her younger brother. She is the facilitator of the North Bay Lewy Body Dementia Support Group, who serves the counties north of San Francisco, as well as a support services volunteer for LBDA, a trained LBD caregiver, peer mentor, a member of the University of California, San Francisco Memory and Aging Center's Family Advisory Council, the former LBD consultant to UCSF's Care Ecosystem Study. She's also a member of the Lived Experience Group at the Global Brain Health Institute and a speaker for various organizations and health systems on the topic of caregiving and global advocacy. And in 2022, she was named our Volunteer of the Year here at LBDA. And lastly, Michael Laibson is an Emmy-winning producer of daytime dramas. For over 20 years, he led the creative teams at All My Children, As the World Turns, Guiding Light, and Another World. And a little secret, I got to hold his Emmy recently. So really proud for this Emmy winning producer. Besides master classes for many acting schools within the tri-state area, he has been teaching acting for the camera, directing actors in television production at the New York Film Academy in many locations for over 14 years. And he is also himself currently living with Lewy. So I hand it off to you guys, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Brandi. I just have to say that whatever's on my resume, I'm trying to be like all of you. So so that is impressive, all of you. And so I just want to go ahead and put out this disclaimer. I know we had this conversation, but I just want to make sure that I kind of double down on it, that for any question that you feel motivated or not motivated to answer, no pressure. We can move right on along, okay? And so I'm just going to kind of do a toss up, and whoever feels, feels like they want to answer it, go for it. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you all is, when you received the diagnosis of Lewy, what were your first thoughts and feelings?
Dan and I are trying to figure out who should talk. Probably both should, but you can start, Dan.
So I remember telling the neurologist I wanted to go get ice cream because we, I don't remember exactly how long it took to get a diagnosis, but it was a long time. It was certainly more than a year, might have been 2 or longer. And, the day we got the diagnosis, I think that by then we were, we thought there was a high probability that, that was going to be the diagnosis. So it wasn't really a surprise, but it was, I guess an end to that ambiguous and uncertain chapter of the journey from the time we knew something was going on that wasn't really normal to what to knowing what it was and figuring out what to do next, understand what to do next. And I remember, the next thing that came to mind while we were sitting there eating ice cream was we got to tell the kids now. How do we tell the kids? And then as the days and weeks kind of progressed, it was all this uncertainty kept popping up. It was in every chapter of our life. Well, oh, what about that? Oh, what about that? And so that was ice cream was a good way to start.
I agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. Michael, did you have anything to add?
Just that I accidentally, after 4 years of searching, found out what was wrong. Because one of my other doctors asked me, he knew that I had tremors and things like that. And he asked me if I had, what the results were of my DAT scan. And my what? I had never heard of a DAT scan. So he said, you should probably talk to your neurologist about it. So I did, of course. And my neurologist said, what a good idea. And I felt like somebody was teaching him what I needed from him. And I felt relief, like Dan did, because we'd been hunting and hunting and hunting. And I thought I'd rather know what's going to kill me and when than to not know at all what's going on. And when I got the news, that pretty much maintained, at least for a little bit. But one of the first things that I had to do was discuss this with my family. That was hard. And what I can't get them to do now is to talk to me about their feelings. I don't know how you guys do, but.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say thank you for that, Michael. I think that what you're speaking to, and you too, Dan, is this delay of the unknowing, right? Not knowing what's happening, not knowing what's going on. And I think that is one of the hardest pieces. And I think that there are several diseases that comes up for, especially Lewy, that workup and kind of going to one doctor to another doctor. And for our folks in the audience, a DAT scan is a dopamine transport or transporter test. It's a radiological study that helps take a look at dopamine in the brain. And so the next thing I want to ask you all is what are some of the changes that you've noticed with Lewy? And how do some of those changes make you feel? And again, no pressure from anybody. Go for it, Michael.
Don't let me talk too much. There have been tremendous changes, and I know there are more to come. And one thing, I don't know how the rest of you guys feel, but one of the things is you have these sometimes traumatic days where you cannot think straight at all. You can't figure out how to delete something on your computer. Things that you never had to think about before. It was just, it became natural. Those start disappearing. And I'm just very aware that my kids are watching this, and I don't want to frighten them. That's it for now. Did I answer the question at all?
No, you absolutely answered the question.
Because
No,
as I was thinking about it, I went, what was the question again? Because that's what happens to me.
no, and that I also want to, make sure that there's enough time for, for you to think about your answer and everything like that as well. And so, moving along, unless anybody else wants to offer any insight. Okay. The next question I have for you all is, how have you ever experienced feelings of sadness or grief with the progression of Lewy, and how do you cope with those feelings?
Yeah, I can address it too. Michael, if you want to go ahead first, then I'll
Please,
take off.
Go.
Take it.
Yeah, okay. Since I was not the person living with, I was a care partner for my father and my sister, and only rarely advised my brother. He wasn't nearby, but and to go through it multiple times, you feel like you're on this. Talk about the Lewy roller coaster. You think, oh, it's a one-off, and then it's not. And my sister and I were exceedingly close. We'd had a brain damaged mother when we were children, and she took over running the family. So we went through a lot, and she was exceptional at just being there for all of us. There were 5 kids, but kind of from the care partner, kind of my perspective, I really had a very difficult time trying to stay in the present when I was caring for her, because I knew what this disease did. With my father, he had 5 years. With my sister, she survived 15 years with the disease. But my brain kept projecting out what, I would literally have visions during the middle of the day saying, here she is at end stage. And so it literally took me to finally say, enough is enough. You are not doing yourself, your family, nor her any favors by projecting. You've
Right.
got to live in the present. And so I literally walked out of my office, shut myself in another one, and got on the phone to a counseling center. And by a miracle, I happened to get connected to a counselor who concentrated purely on caregivers. And I saw her every month for the remainder, and this was multiple years. And it was mostly that she wasn't telling me how to caregive. That wasn't the goal. The goal was for me to keep a balance, because without that balance, I couldn't provide proper care. It wasn't going to be possible. And so that was kind of the external, and I certainly joined a support group. But more importantly, I also made sure every day I have quiet time first thing in the morning, so I can tackle the day. But I would literally, if it just meant opening my sliding door to listen to the birds in the yard, just to have a moment of prayer or just a moment of solitude, whatever it was, that at least could help jump me off, start the day with some positivity.
Thank you, Helen. That is fantastic, right? So that is exactly what I'm talking about when we're talking about that validation piece, right? When we're talking about that hopeful time. And like you said, and I really like that you said the therapist or the mental health professional was not there to teach you how to caregive, but to give you the tools of just being with yourself and knowing what's happening internally for you as you navigate this. And I think that's important, because I think that sometimes there's misconceptions of what mental health providers do. So thank you for dispelling that. Jumping to our next question, can you share a time where you felt uncertain about your role as a care partner or a family member because of ambiguous losses associated with Lewy?
Jump in with some uncertainty and what is my role as a care partner. So the transition of one of Dan's passions is riding his bicycle, and he likes to do it with friends, but he also goes out and rides alone, and trying to navigate that road of what is safe, but what gives freedom, what allows for independence. Can I be available to jump in the car and pick him up if he rides too far and runs out of water? Those types of things, trying to figure out, what is my role as a caregiver? It's not to set limits, it's to support Dan in living his best life. And part of living that best life is accepting some risk associated with getting on his bike, whether it's, to ride around the neighborhood or to go further, and to, just recognize that supporting is not the same as controlling, and
Right.
trying to set limits. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Jen. I think that you pull out a very important part, because I think that when we try to show up for care, right? When we try to care for someone, we try to be like, well, if you do it this way, then everything will be okay. Because we know that it operates within our understanding of safety. But I think that just like many other care partners, sometimes you have to, loosen the reins, so to speak, right? So thank you for that. I think that's a really important piece. Dan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I want to compliment Jen. She was like, when, it was a few years ago when we were starting this journey, I went for a bike ride one day and I wasn't sure how to get home, and so I called her and she picked me up, and I wasn't that far, but it was hot that day.
We
And
got ice cream.
yeah, and she was like, she picked me up and she didn't scold me. She didn't say anything. She was just very supportive. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I just got a little confused. And she puts my bike in the car and she goes, do you want to get ice cream? I was like, yeah. And we're driving to the ice cream place. She goes, you're like a little kid. She goes, I got to come pick you up and now I'm taking to get you ice cream.
Love.
But it's that laughter, that it's better medicine than any doctor can write your prescription for. And that's not, certainly don't mean to offend any doctors, but there's no side effects to laughter.
No, that's exactly it, right? To be able to find the humor in this. I mean, they say that's nature's medicine, right? So just, taking a step back, and it sounds like ice cream has kept you all moving and good, and I love that. So moral of the story, everybody, is go eat ice cream. Michael agrees. Helen, did you have anything to add in regards to that at all?
I don't want to take it in a negative vein, because there is so much that so many caregivers, this is a new journey, right? You're blindsided in many, many cases. And, I know that myself with my dad, because unfortunately my dad had a really rough journey. Everything that could go wrong with Lewy did. And so it was a moment in a psych unit where I was caring for him there, where I just said, I've got to leave my job. My life has to completely shift. And that was a hard one. But my husband supported it. Thank goodness I had other support. And it made a huge difference. And so that's kind of, when you feel uncertain about, your role or your place in the family. I'm the middle child, right? I'm the youngest daughter. But I was always the one that had to step in, had to sacrifice, had to, give up things for, my family had loss because we cut our income way down. And so it was like, okay, but you have to then garner confidence in what you're doing, seek support, seek guidance, but then also find a place within yourself that you have value in this. And I think that's really an important lesson, because I know caregivers feel so beat down and unguided at times.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that your experience is one I hear a lot about, right? So it's how do I navigate work? How do I navigate, like you kind of shooting in the dark, hoping that you hit the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to, validate and that resonates, I'm sure, with a lot of people in a care partner position.
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to ask,
It resonates with me, not as a caregiver, but as a caretaker, because my kids are the ones who are taking care of me. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. The way it's supposed to be is I take care of them, which I've happily done, most of the time happily. And it was really hard for me to accept the fact that they were going to step in and help me. What they told me was that I had taken care of them for a long time, so it's their turn, which helped. But still, it's still a process I'm trying to figure out.
No, absolutely. And so what you're bringing up, Michael, is a point that comes up for a lot of people. We call it age role. And so what happens is that we associate the age or what our role was prior to that individual. And when it starts to shift, when something like Lewy takes place, right? When it starts to shift, there's like a daunting moment of like, this is not how this is supposed to be. I changed this person's diapers and now they're trying to take care of me. And that doesn't always sit well. Especially and what it does is it speaks to that point that we were talking about, redefining roles, right? So we all have a role within our family unit, and our roles are very clear, even if they're unspoken. Everybody knows what they do. And they bring a homeostasis to our dynamic. And so sometimes those roles have to be reassessed and changed, or altered or pivoted, so to speak. And so I definitely want to resonate that what you're saying is something that comes up a lot as well. So I definitely thank you for adding that piece to that conversation.
Sure.
The next thing I want to ask you all, can you share a time where you felt uncertain about your role as a care partner or as a family member? We talked about that already. Okay. Don't mind me, folks. Okay, next question is, what strategies have you found helpful in staying connected and maintaining a sense of hope and resilience amidst the challenges of Lewy? Go for it, Michael.
All right. There have been many, but I'm just going to concentrate on the first one that had an impact on me, was with my shrink, who said, I know what this sounds like, Michael, but I want you to make a list of the 100 things that you love about being alive. It was very important to me to not die until I was dead. I didn't want to spend my time waiting for that. So I made a list. It was harder than I thought it would be. But I rediscovered the things that I had grown to have no feelings about anymore. I remember I was walking with my daughter when she was about 2 or 3 on the sidewalk in front of our house. And she stopped and kneeled down as little kids can do. I hate them for that. And she just was like focused on this little weed that was growing out of the sidewalk. And she could have sat there for hours,
Mhm.
just examining and examining and examining. And I'm sure I felt that way when I was a kid. So what I'm trying to do through this list is to refine a lot of the things that I now take for granted.
Mm. That's really good. And I thank you for that imagery. I think that we, as we navigate life, right, let alone Louis, that we sometimes lose touch with those little things. So little things, like you said earlier, Michael. And by shrink, I'm assuming you mean mental health professional.
And is it okay to call them shrinks now? Because
I don't tell anybody what language to use.
Okay.
If that's what you refer to that person as, and that is what that person is. Um, they are mental. I know what you mean. And so for the folks at home who might not know what you mean, we're talking about mental health professionals.
I started with doctor as I was dealing with her, and then eventually, after about, I don't know, 3 years maybe, I could call her by her first name, which changes the relationship a little bit, actually.
It does, and it certainly opens up people to have more dialogue, and feel more free to have, you know, dialogue about a lot of sensitive topics. So definitely hear you with that. Um, Moving along, if no one has anything else to add to that piece.
Oh, I don't, Jen's reminded me what the question was.
Any strategies you found helpful? in
Oh.
staying connected?
Yeah, so, um,
Number 6.
no, sorry.
No worries.
I was just say, like Michael was referencing, a strategy I think that we utilize a lot in our family is being outside or looking out the window or filling up the bird feeder, but having those opportunities to be present in nature, because it does slow you down and changes your perspective from self-focus to just appreciating the wonder of the
Yeah.
world. So I would say that that's certainly a strategy that we've utilized to uh, just experience joy, and it helps to create hope.
Yes.
No, absolutely. The kids have an expression now calling, they say, I gotta go touch grass. And so I absolutely, and that goes back to that last piece I was talking about finding the bigger meaning, right? Thinking about the bigger picture. And I think that it's much easier to do that in nature. And being cooped up in the house can really change someone's thought process and outlook, right? But once you see like you said, Jen, the wonder that is nature, and being in it, it completely can shift a thought process.
Yeah,
Um,
and so I'd like to add something that our children are adults now, but it's really hard to know if this is affecting them and how, and it probably changes from day to day, moment to moment, because like how it affects me changes, moment to moment. And so one of the things that has become very helpful for me is I ask my kids, so what is making you laugh nowadays?
Oh,
I
And
like that. That's a good question.
and what almost inevitably happens is, if they're not in a good place, the answer is, well, no, not much, or but inevitably we get to something that made them laugh recently, and then we start talking about that, and then it just keeps spiraling, and the next thing you know, the two of us are laughing about many things. And I think the greatest sound in the world is the sound of my family's laughter.
oh,
I really, really love listening to my family laugh. And that simple question has just helped me, I think, get through to them. Uh, Either when it was, maybe they were in a place that was hard for them, or maybe I was in a place that was hard for me, and they were trying to have a more intellectual conversation, and I
Right.
wasn't, you know,
Yeah.
what was Jimmy Kimmel doing last night? You know that, and it's really, really been helpful.
And
No.
also just want to add a quickie that in our support group every week, we always laugh, not through the entire thing, but there's always a few good laughs that go on. And that's so important to all of us.
Absolutely. Well, we're winding down, but I just want to give a space for any last thoughts around any advice, or what are some important things about living with Lewy, or maybe with dealing with some of the ambiguous losses associated with Lewy. Kind of, what do you want our viewers to take away from this? What do you think would be helpful? What has helped you that might help them?
Oof.
I know, a
Well,
loaded question.
yeah, I'll kind of take, because I prepared a lot of notes, but we're going to shove all those lot of notes out the window. I really think that it's so important for all of us to kind of look at self-care as a mechanism to, whether we're the one living with Lewy or whether we're a care partner or whatever our relationship is. And for me, it was, and my sister too, we exercised together for 4 years, 3 days a week. We laughed, we created a community because we did water aerobics. And then we go into the showers, and my sister loved to sing. So everybody in the locker room is singing together. And, we laughed, we cried, and then I would pull away and I would do my own self-care too. But then whatever practices I utilized, I would share with her, because she was a very unselfish person. And so she never thought of her own needs. And so it was like, hey, let me be the spoiled one and let me spoil you. Let me share that. And I think it was important, no matter what we did or where we went. We shared, we certainly found moments of joy, smiling, and a lot of laughter, like everybody else refers to.
One of the things that people need to know when they are diagnosed is that nobody knows how long it's going to take to come to our ends, as we don't, and even if we don't have this disease.
Mm-hmm.
And so I already said what I meant by it, but stay alive. Stay alive. There are some things I've had to take off my bucket list. I'm probably not going to, fly through the air with somebody on top of me to make sure I'm safe. I think that's gone. But there are a lot of other things that I can do and want to make sure that they happen.
I really love that, Michael. Stay alive. That's the message for today. Take care of yourself and stay alive.
So I think everyone's starting in a different place. We're all on a different journey. But like the general advice I would give people is I had to learn to let go of the dreams that I used to have and get a different set of dreams. And I had to kind of learn that, like, somebody told me you need a new mission. And boy, it really didn't take that long. It was like a week. I was like, I know what my mission is, love, laugh, learn, help others. And that's what I'm going to try to do every day. And that's kind of like my North Star. And when you get out of bed and you're having a good day, you can have a good day. But when you get out of bed and, like Michael said, you're not having a good day, and things that should be easy are not easy, you can simplify and say, okay, I only got so much energy today. I'm going to focus on doing something, love, laugh, learn, help others. And that has been really powerful for me.
It's one of the things I grabbed from you in the support group, actually.
What's that, Michael?
That's one of the things that grabbed me in the support group.
Oh, thank you.
When you talked to us about how you were doing that.
I love that North Star metaphor. I think that it will resonate with folks as well. And I know that we're coming down on time, but I just want to, Jen, if you had anything to
Yeah,
offer, to
I
give
would
you
just offer that there is hope, and living with Lewy, it is part of living. And that I trust that as new challenges arise, so too new solutions will arise,
Mm.
and our team will grow and expand as new needs, come along. So I just, would encourage people to trust in life, and trust in the moment, and just be open and say yes to life, yes to joy.
Yes, say yes. I love that. Thank you, everybody. Brandi, did you want to take us away?
Yeah, that is so hard to come after. I mean, what beautiful advice. Like we said, we are sitting among experts, and I love everything that's been highlighted, and all of you guys in your own way have really focused on the living part of this. And what we find is that many people have a tough road to get to diagnosis. And then they have this label of why they're experiencing the changes. And then there's lots of Tuesdays after that. And so sometimes I think so much focus is on sort of the why that we forget the how after. And so this has been such a beautiful reminder of sort of how to work through all of those Tuesdays after, and how to lean in on each other. And I love just the advice that was shared. So thank you all. And thank you, Lance. We had some wonderful questions come through, and we're going to take the next couple minutes to go over as many as we can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to punt a couple specifically, but I'm going to toss a couple in the air, and whoever wants to answer can. One, Lance, I wanted to go back. There was some clarification about, you had used the word validation. And so in being validated or feeling validated, do you think that's the same thing as empathy?
Not necessarily. You do not have to be empathic to validate someone's experience. An empath, which is different than sympathy, right? So tending to someone's emotions because you can see yourself in their shoes is one thing. Typically they can coexist, they can exist in the same space, but validating is saying, even if you have no remote understanding of what that person's experiencing, and they say that this is what they're experiencing, you say, you don't even have to say you don't understand. Even if you don't understand, you're validated, right? You are experiencing what you're experiencing. Who am I to tell you that you're not experiencing it in that way? And so that's what validation means to me.
Got it. So just saying basically your truth is your truth in those moments.
Exactly. You got it. It's your truth.
Yeah. Thank you. And sort of a toss the ball up question. There was somebody that came in as a newer care partner. And so they're saying, how can one prepare knowing that sort of ambiguous loss will come? Is there any advice on sort of the, I hate to say bracing for, or best preparing for future feelings around ambiguous loss?
What
Anyone?
comes to my mind is just try to learn as much as you can about the disease so that you will be aware of what may be coming. And I say may because it doesn't hit everybody the same way, of course. But the more you know, the more strength you have.
Absolutely.
And and from an emotional place, it can, it's also understanding from a care partner. Let's take a care partner's perspective. It's understanding and having sat down with the person who's been diagnosed, and finding out what their goals are. Truly getting to understand what their needs are, not necessarily your own, theirs, and how can you work to fulfill those, how and address them. And so I think that so many care relationships, everybody's walking on eggshells. No one wants to talk sometimes about the hard stuff, and you don't necessarily even have to talk about that stuff, the hard stuff. Talk about what matters on a daily basis. What is important to the individual, and how you can kind of put together this co-plan that says, all right, on certain days, I'm going to support you to meet your needs, but also your goals. And I'm going to support you in your sense of purpose and use on a daily basis. And I think, and as it shifts, you shift. And I think for me, at least, that's what helped me. I knew I was supporting my loved ones to be the best they could be, no matter what stage they were at. And that did help heal my heart in many ways.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I know there was another question in Q&A about completing advanced directives as a point in some of this, but I think, Helen, I love the fact that you highlighted that much larger conversation, because yes, it's important to document, it's important to have certain conversations around very hyper-specific medical care and choices, but that's not who we are as humans. Our needs are bigger. Our needs are much more holistic. And so being able to pluck out and have those conversations about priorities, especially if they may differ from the person that will be sort of responsible for making some of those later choices for you. Thank you, Helen. There was another person sort of from that care partner angle that said they experienced the death of their loved one with Lewy a couple months ago. And what they found is their prior feelings of ambiguous loss really complicated and continues to complicate their current grief experience. Any thoughts or advice on sort of the unweaving of or ways to cope around or get support around those complicated grief factors?
That's a tough one, I'll
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah.
Because what happens when you've been a care partner for a very, very long time is you are so deep in that role that when it's not there anymore, you lose who you are.
Right.
I caregive so many members of my family that I'll never forget the day my husband came in, and I'd been, they're gone, but I'm still doing the paperwork. I'm making sure all the stuff's getting done, and I couldn't stop. And my husband looked at me and he said, "It's Sunday. We're going to go do something fun. You're to stop doing what you're doing." And you know what? I couldn't think of anything. I literally sat on my bed and I cried. I had forgotten about not just our relationship, but about myself. And then a bright idea came to me and we did do something fun, but that taught me a very serious lesson. In all of this, we have to retain ourselves, the person living with and the care partner. And we have to spend time really, really saying, okay, I have value, I am important, and I can't always give 100 or 150%. Even if I just keep 1% for myself, I have to, because it will physically and mentally take you down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lance, did you have more to contribute on that specific topic?
Oh, absolutely. I think that Helen really hit the nail on the head. I think that when all of that, again, we talk about how ambiguous loss freezes the grief process, right? And so I'm assuming for that individual was just like the floodgates had opened, and trying to figure out what emotions go where, and it's just like trying to do a puzzle in a hurricane. And so trying to make it make sense. I think that's not something that someone should do alone. I think that it's complicated, right? I think that it's grieving on multiple levels at the same time is a heavy charge for any one person to do. I like that Helen teased out that, someone else was looking out for her. Someone else, her husband was, hey, we're not doing that today. Sometimes we need those people and have that support. But we don't always know how to ask for that support. And so my advice to that, to tag on to Helen's, is to find grieve with someone. You don't grieve by yourself, whether you need a mental health professional or you have other family, grieve with someone.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I think what Helen highlighted is often some of the tenets of self-compassion. So if I saw Helen do that, I would stop her in her tracks, but I would not stop me in my tracks. The same way Helen did not, she wasn't able to like look at herself. And so some of the tenets of that is what advice would you give your best friend? And what we find is that we give those around us much more grace and love and understanding and support than often we're turning inward. But often once we get fueled into that moment, it's really hard to figure out what new can look like after. So thank you, Helen, and thank you, Lance. We'll sort of close out because we are right in the last couple minutes, but ambiguous loss. So we talked a lot about this in huge concepts today. There's a great question of if you had to boil it down and explain it in 1 to 3 words to someone else. So if you were looking to explain this to someone else, how would you do that in 1 to 3 words?
I can do 5.
That's fine. I mean, what is that? Name that tune. Name that
Right,
tune.
I was like, I don't think I can get down to 3. I think simply, I mean, it would offer more conversation, but lost, it doesn't make sense.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Jen?
I was gonna say, could you say your 5 again? It doesn't make
Lost.
sense. It's
Lost, that doesn't make sense.
lost, it doesn't make sense.
Jen or Dan, did you have something to add, or Michael or Helen?
I feel like
I-
it's
yeah.
that holding the 2 polarities is what it is. It's the yes and the no. It's the grief and the joy. It's everything in between those extremes. I couldn't say it in three words, but I can say it in the space of 2 words, where it's sorrow and joy.
Gray space.
Yeah, Helen?
I see it as, because when it hit me, it was like an emptiness that overtook. So it's like filling that emptiness. Because it comes and it still comes, I'll be honest, it still hits every once in a while. And, but I stop myself, and I also say grace. That is my one word, grace. That's the one. And that was how my sister was described by all of her friends. She had huge grace. So it's like, okay, sis, give me some grace today. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen.
Love that.
And Michael, anything to add before we round out the day?
No, I'm still curious about how it's all going to end, but I'm not frightened by it. I'm living with it, as we all talk about living with Lewy, and that's what I'm doing. And besides the bad days, there are days that you feel like your old self. It can be dangerous because you think you are your old self. Not.
That's when you get up on that balance beam and try to do a backflip, right? Well, I have appreciated this conversation. I appreciate you, Lance, for making space for this and really striking conversation, and for Helen and Dan and Jen and Michael for sharing what this experience has meant to you all in this space as you are affected. Us being out of time, I feel like when we look at these, we're like, oh, that's plenty of time. And then we get into it and we're like, where's the time? So as we come to the end of this one again, really on the behalf of the LBDA, I really want to thank you all, especially those that are attending virtually, for your time and attention. You all have brought such empowerment and insight and thoughtfulness to us. And as a reminder, you're going to receive an email in about a week with a link to this recording, as well as the resources and links that were mentioned in the webinar. We definitely invite you to check out our events calendar frequently at the bottom of our homepage. If you go to lbda.org, scroll all the way down, you will see our events there listed, and there will be registration links for the upcoming webinars as well. And we do invite you to mark your calendars for our next webinar, which will be held Thursday, May 16th at 3 o'clock. Eastern, Demystifying the Lewy Body Dementia Women in the Spotlight. And it's going to have a conversation about women in the LBD community. And Rose is going to drop that in the chat. And finally, at the end, you will see a survey come up, and we do invite you to complete the survey. That does help us again to shape for future education. And we all hope to see you again in the future for a future webinar. Take care. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.